126. Egypt's role in the evolution of consciousness. The ancients used certain symbols to represent the three aspects of consciousness we use for our sojourn here on earth. You'll see representations of these symbols all over the world. These depictions have one animal that lives underground, one that walks on the earth, and one that flies over the earth. The animal that lives under the ground represents the microcosm, the one who flies through the air represents the macrocosm, and the one who walks the earth represents the middle level between the two, like us. The same symbols are everywhere. In Egypt you'll see a vulture on the left, the right eye of Horus in the middle, then a cobra on the right, fig 5-1. In Peru it's the condor, the puma, and the rattlesnake. For the American Indians it's the eagle, the mountain lion, and the rattle snake. In Tibet it's a chicken, a pig, and a snake. This photo, fig 5-2, shows the tools and symbols of resurrection the Egyptians used. The object at point A is a shortened form of a rod that's usually about 4 feet long, and has a little tuning fork on one end and a 45-degree angle on the other end. This was used at the back of the head to transfer vibration into the body. Along with that they used the hook and the flail, which we'll see in just a moment. Arrow B points to the oval, which is usually a red-orange color, that you see over the initiates' heads. This was the symbol for the metamorphosis that happens when we go through resurrection or ascension, when we literally change the shape and chemistry of our body. Arrow C shows a power generator they sometimes use to increase the vibration. Unfortunately, Thoth left before I could fully understand the use of this object. Arrow D indicates the Ankh, which I understand more, and I'll give you my understanding. It's the most important tool of understanding they possessed. From an Egyptian point of view, it's the key to eternal life. Arrow E points to a triangle within a triangle, which is the Egyptian hieroglyphic for the star Sirius, the symbol for Sirius A and Sirius B. Point F is just a name, called a car touche. The bird at the top right is a vulture, which is sacred to the Egyptians and associated with the movement from one level of consciousness to another. I'm not going to go into the other things in the picture, but these are some of the tools the early Egyptians used. These geometric images, fig 5-3, come from the Old Kingdom. The little flower of life patterns are associated with Lehirat, the pyramid that I believe destroys the Saqqara theory. Figure 5-4 is a picture of Osiris, on the left. He's holding a crook, A, a 45-degree rod with a tuning fork on the end, B, and a flail, C, which are the three primary instruments used for resurrection. These tools were connected with resurrection, not ascension. There's a difference between the two. What is the difference? First of all, there's dying, a process where you go into the void state immediately after death. You're unconscious, unaware of the dying process to the degree that you have no control over the images. This way of dying takes you into the third overdone of the fourth dimension, which results in your cycling back into this earth existence again and again, reincarnation. Because you're unconscious in this cycle, you're not using your Merkaba except unconsciously, so once you get to the other side, you don't have any memories of this side. When you reincarnate back to earth again, you don't have any memories of where you just came from, either. So the reincarnating just keeps going on and on. It's a lot of energy moving very slowly. You even to ally get through it, but it's a very slow process. When you go through resurrection, you're aware and conscious of your Merkaba, though usually you don't become fully aware of it until after you die. You die, you drop the body, and then you become aware of your Merkaba. Then you recreate your body and go through a process that leads you into either the 10th, 11th, or 12th overdone of the fourth dimension. From there you don't go through reincarnation anymore. Your memory is never blocked again and you continue on into eternal life. There's a big difference between dying and resurrection, but there's an even greater difference in ascension, which is now possible, since the grid was calm. Pledged in 1989. Ascension was highly unlikely until this grid was complete. In Ascension you don't die at all, there's no death process involved as we know it. Of course, it is true that you no longer are on Earth, and from that point of view, you die. What happens is, you simply become aware of your Merkaba one way or another, either remembering it on your own, being taught it, or however it happens to you. This means you become aware of your body as light. Then you're able to pass through the void totally consciously from the earth side through the void to the higher dimensions, aware the whole time. In this way you simply walk out of this life without going through the death process, which involves reconstructing your human body. When a person ascends, he/she simply disappears from this dimension and reappears in the next, passing through the void. Ascension is now completely possible, and this book is one possible set of instructions on exactly how to accomplish this process. You personally might not pass through ascension, you might actually die or go through resurrection. It doesn't make much difference at this point in the game of life on planet Earth, because if you die in the normal manner, you'll go into the third overdone and into a holding pattern for a while. Then when the rest of the Earth cycles through this coming change, all people on that third overdone will also rise to the same dimensional level as those who resurrected or ascended. Even the Bible refers to this, saying that at this time the dead will rise. There is no such thing as death, there are just different states of being. It's a little like water, which can be a liquid, solid, ice, or gas, fog, but it is still water. Right now very few human reincarnations are occurring on Earth except under certain conditions. This is probably your last life, folks, this is it. Of course, there are exceptions to almost all rules, so there may be a few on this Earth who have decided to reincarnate. Time is running out. If we make it to the end of this century, I'll be amazed. I seriously doubt if the third dimension will still be available for human life by that time. Only God knows for certain. Where are the people coming from who are being born on Earth today? Not from here. I'll explain when I talk about the new children. As Egypt began to evolve, it developed into two countries, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt was south and Lower Egypt was north. Egyptians named Upper and Lower Egypt in this sort of reverse way of thinking, because in their earlier life as a country during Atlantis, the earth was rotating in the opposite direction and the magnetic poles were reversed. Our present north was then south and vice versa. Not only did the poles shift their position after Atlantis, but the earth actually rotated in the opposite direction. Thoth said that he's gone through 5 pole shifts. He's seen the sun rise in the east and he's seen it rise in the west, then in the east, the west, and again the east 5 times. On the ceiling of the temple at Dendera, which is the heart chakra of the male aspect of the Christ grid, is an astrological zodiac that demonstrates this reversed polarity. The zodiac rotates in the opposite direction, as if the sun rose in the west instead of the east. Fig 5:5. The river Nile flows from south to north, whereas almost all the other rivers in the world flow from north to south. This indicates to me that the Egyptians held onto the older energy flow even in the earth. We are the creators of our universe. People involved in Sufism may remember Sufi Sam, also known as Murshid Sam Lewis. He was buried in the early 70s, I believe at the Lama Foundation in New Mexico. There's a plaque over his grave that reads, "On that day the sun will rise in the west, and all men seeing will believe." He was referring to the time that's coming. When the poles shift this next time, there will be a reversal of the Earth's rotation, thus the way we move in relation to the Sunday. Osiris the First Immortal. Prior to Egypt, during Atlantis, existed the Nakul Mystery School headed by Ayantaya and 1,000 members from Lemuria. It was located on the island of Udal, north of the mainland. They were trying to teach the Atlanteans how to become immortal. The only thing is, either they weren't very good teachers then, or the people just couldn't get it. Because it took 20 to 30,000 years before one person finally achieved the immortal state of being. The first person to make it was Osiris, who was not Egyptian, but Atlantean. The story of Osiris didn't happen in Egypt, even though it talks About the Nile, but in Atlantis. Though most of you know this story, I'll tell it anyway, in a condensed form. There were 2 brothers and 2 sisters from the same family. Their names were Isis, Osiris, Nephthys, Orniphus, and Set. Isis married Osiris and Nephthys married Set. At the point where this story begins, Set killed Osiris. He put Osiris' body in a box and floated it down the Nile, though it was really another river in Atlantis. This killing disturbed Isis, and she and her sister, Set's wife, went out to look for Osiris. They found his body and brought it back, intending to bring Osiris back to life. When Set found out, he cut Osiris' body into 14 pieces and spread them all over the world so that his sisters could not bring him back to life. Isis and Nephthys then went out looking for these pieces to put him back together. They found 13 of the 14 and assembled the pieces, but they never found the phallus, the 14th piece. It was Thoth, who was in Atlantis as well as Egypt, who, through magic, restored the 14th piece. This restored the creative energy flow, brought Osiris back to life and, in addition, gave him immortality. From the Egyptian point of view, it was through sexual energy that immortality was reached. Remember, it was through sexual energy, Tantra, that immortality took root in Lemuria. I'm going to leave the last element of this story until another appropriate moment, because a certain understanding needs to come first. But notice that Osiris was first alive, walking around in a body in the first level of consciousness. Then he was killed and his body was cut into pieces. He was separated from himself. This was consciousness level 2, our level. Then his pieces were brought back together and he was made whole again, which put him into the 3rd level of consciousness, which is immortality. He went through 3 levels of consciousness. The first one was whole, the second one was separated from itself. And in the 3rd level all the components were brought back together. This made him whole again and also made him immortal. He would no longer die. When Osiris finally got through all this, he came back as an immortal being, the first resurrected master of Atlantis. So they used Osiris's understanding of how he became immortal as the template for how other people could reach the same state of consciousness. This became the religion of Atlantis and later on the religion of Egypt. The transpersonal holographic memory of first level of consciousness. Atlanteans, because of the way their brains functioned, had complete memory. They remembered everything that had ever happened to them. And their memory was transpersonal, which means that anything one person remembered, the others in their race could remember. The Aborigines in Australia have this type of memory right now. When anything happens to one Aborigine, any other can re-experience it anytime he or she wants. If an Aborigine were to walk into this room right now, he or she would in effect be giving the experience to all of their race anywhere on the planet. You see, they're on the first level of consciousness where they're not separated from themselves. We're on the second level and are very separated from ourselves. Like the Atlanteans, Aborigines don't have memory like our vague kind of recollection, they have full tilt 3D holographic memory. They could reconstruct this room moment by moment through the entire workshop, and all the rest of them could walk around in here and look at it. They could walk up to your table and look into your eyes. It wouldn't be real time, it's what they call dream time, like in a dream. But it's an absolute replica of the reality. Their memory is perfect, they don't have any mistakes or flaws. Obviously. In that kind of culture the Atlanteans had no reason to write anything down. Why try to describe something with words when you've got the real thing? They didn't need it, however, the Martian aspect did need it, so they had a written language. Even after the fall, the Egyptians, and others, had an amazing ability to remember. At that point they had lost their holographic and transpersonal memory, but they still had photographic memory. When the mystery school students were doing the complicated kind of training we'll be doing soon, they could do it all in their head. With our less efficient memory, we cannot do this in the same way they did. We have to struggle just to remember someone's name. The complexity will increase as we progress, making it difficult to remember from photo to photo, but the ancient ones could do this completely in their head. There is something about doing this in your head that's important, so later I'm going to show you some illustrations that will assist you to do this yourself. This experience holds a primary key for understanding the nature of creation. Recreate the illustrations that follow, as if you were actually in the void moving through the geometrical movements. Experiencing it gives you the understanding that the circles on the page represent actual movements, and that these geometrical movements of spirit in the void are the beginning and end of creation. The introduction of writing which createth second level of consciousness. The 42 books of thought record that after the fall, when the Atlanteans got into Egypt and were no longer experiencing full memory, writing was introduced. In fact, it's written right in the Egyptian records that it was Thoth who introduced writing to the world. This one act completed the fall and threw us out of the first level of consciousness and fully into the second, because it changed the way we accessed memory. It sealed our fate. This act of learning how to write caused us to grow the top half of our skull from our eyebrows up. The simple act of introducing writing changed many factors in the way we perceive our reality. To get at our memory now, we have to go in and pull out the desired information with a code. We go in with a word or a concept to bring back the memory of whatever it is. In fact, we can't even remember something without having certain eye movements. Our eyes have to 132 move in certain ways in order for the memories to flow out. The Egyptian memory system was vastly different from the way it was before the fall. Comparing this change of memory to the Osiris saga, the Egyptians had entered the stage where they were in separate pieces, where they were inside their bodies, thinking they were separate from the rest of reality. This feeling of being separate was, of course, destined to change many aspects of how human beings live. The roadblock of polytheism chromosomes and netters. Now the plot thickens. Things were going well with the stair-step evolution plan. After a while Upper and Lower Egypt combined into one country under King Menes and the first dynasty began. But as time went on, a serious problem developed which, if it had not been solved, would have caused major catastrophes for us in the 20th century. In fact, we would not have survived as a planet. We wouldn't have had a chance. It seems like a not so important thing, but it was very important for some who watch over this planet. It had to do with the religious beliefs of the Egyptians. As I said, the Egyptians no longer had full holographic transpersonal memory anymore, so they had to write down what their religion was. This writing is called the 42 Books of Thoth. Donald Beeman, who lives in Boston, is the man who reconstructed this book. There were 42 books, with 2 more books set aside from the main body. 42 plus 2 represents the number of chromosomes of the first level of consciousness. Your chromosomes, as you are about to see, are geometric images and patterns that describe the entire reality. Not just your body, but everything in the reality, from the most distant planet to the smallest plant and every single atom. Inside his book you'll see what are called netters. Netters are gods, with a small g. This is one of the netters, Anubis Fig 5-6. They are mythical human beings with animal heads, and each one represents a different chromosome, a different aspect and characteristic of life. Netters represent the pathway of how to go from the first to the second level of consciousness. They ascended masters used Osiris' particular genetic coding to help other people learn how to ascend. In other words, Osiris had lived the experience of ascension, and now the pathway was in his DNA, specifically the chromosomes. The genetic keys were then opened to the initiate through the netters, who represented Osiris' chromosomes. But a problem developed from this way of representing their religion, especially as Upper and Lower Egypt again became more separated. Both Lower and Upper Egypt had 42 plus 2 gods, or netters, representing these stages. But Upper Egypt had images slightly different from those of Lower Egypt. The images had changed over time when the 2 countries were separate. When Menes put the 2 countries together as a single country called Egypt, in order to be politically correct he adopted all these images. So now they had 84 plus 4 gods representing the same religious ideas. That was probably a big mistake, because it got very confusing. For instance, in one area they would take one of the netters like Anubis and say, this is God, with a big G. Another area would say, Isis is God, and another area would claim see Kemet to be their god. So then there were 88 different ideas of God in the country. They would say, my God is the God, and your gods are wrong. It became very separated and occult, and after a while no one had any idea that there really was only one God. They didn't understand what the Tet Brotherhood was trying to tell them. From our American point of view, this would be like a chromosome breakage. It was a mutation, and it was not correct. Even with all the help from the Tet Brotherhood, they just couldn't get it right, and it got worse and worse. All the evidence I've seen indicates that the Christian religion came directly out of the Egyptian religion. If you study both of them, they're parallel in every single way except for the Egyptians' understanding of God. The Christian religion came back later and totally discounted the Egyptian religion, even though Egypt is the probable source of the origins of Christianity. The Christians saw the Egyptians as being a cult. And they were, but it was because their religious belief had become corrupted, with the clear exception of 17/2 years during the 18th dynasty. The rescue of human consciousness. Akhenaten's life a brilliant flash of light. For a very short period of 171/2 years, a brilliant flash of light appeared, then disappeared again. And that brilliant flash of white light is what saved our spiritual lives. It began in approximately 1500 BC, when the worshipping and arguing over so many gods was prevalent. The ascended masters finally decided that something must be done. Finally they chose a plan. Thoth told me the following story. As the first step, they decided to bring in an actual Christ-conscious being in an actual Christ-conscious body so we could put back into the Akashic records the memory of what Christ consciousness was all about. It had been lost in the fall. This Christ-conscious body would be much taller than those on the planet at the time. This would be an example for the Earth people to see. That was the first part of the plan. It was a very bold step, and they did it. The ascended masters had decided that the Christ-conscious person should become king of Egypt. In order to do this, they had to break all the rules, and I mean all of them. What they did was approach the king of that period, Amenhotep II, and ask him for a favor. Thoth simply walked into the room physically, went right up to him and said, "Look, I'm Thoth." Which I'm sure was difficult for the king to believe. By that time the Egyptians probably thought that all those netters in there 134 stories were mythical. Yet here's a real person standing there who was one of the netters. Thoth said, "We have a serious problem here in Egypt, and I need your help." Thoth somehow got Amenhotep II to do something that no Egyptian king would ever do. Amenhotep's son was about to become king, and Thoth said, "I want your son to not become king, I want to put an outside lineage onto the Egyptian throne." Amenhotep II agreed to it. It must have been a pretty profound experience. I don't know what Thoth did. He probably came in glowing or levitating or something like that. But he did something to convince the king that it was necessary. Once they received the king's permission, they had to actually create the living body, which was not easy. Creating body is off Akhenaten then Nefertiti. So how did they do this? They went to I and Taya, who were very, very old, no matter how you look at it, and said, "We would like you to have a baby." They had to go to someone who was immortal to get the immortal genes, because they have a different chromosome count 46 plus 2 instead of 44 plus 2. I and Taya agreed, and they had a little baby. The baby was given to Amenhotep II to become the next king. So the little baby grew up and became king. He became Amenhotep III, who then mated. I am not sure if it was physically or interdimensionally, and I don't know who it was, but he would almost have had to mate with someone who had the higher chromosome levels. Anyway, their baby boy became known as Amenhotep IV, and that baby was the one they had special plans for. That baby, Amenhotep IV, has a more popular name, which you know as Akhenaten. Meanwhile I and Taya waited a generation and then had another baby. That baby was a little girl whose name was Nefertiti. Nefertiti grew up with Akhenaten, and then they married. They were really brother and sister because they had the same bloodline. The Osiris story is similar. Brother and sister marrying and becoming a new possibility in life. So these two people grew up and became the king and queen of Egypt. For a while Amenhotep III and his son Akhenaten ruled the country together, 2 kings at the same time, again breaking the rules. Meanwhile they built a brand new city called Tel El Amarna, in the exact center of Egypt. We still don't know how they got it in the exact center. Akhenaten put a stone there that says, "This is the center of the country." Today we could not have done it better from a satellite. It makes you wonder who these people were who could locate right down to the square inch the center of a country hundreds of miles long. It's pretty amazing. They built an entire city out of white stones. It was beautiful, it was. Space Age. 135. Akhenaten and his father ruled the country simultaneously from 2 places for a while, from Thebes and from Tel El Amarna. The father resigned the throne while he was still alive, which again breaks the rules, and gave the country to Akhenaten, who then became the first pharaoh of Egypt. There were no pharaohs before Akhenaten, only kings. Pharaoh means that which you will become. In other words, they were showing the people what they would literally become in the future. Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their children were not exactly human. This tall figure, Fig 5 to 7, is Akhenaten. I'm going to talk about this picture for a moment. Akhenaten's main purpose was to break up all the occult religions and bring the country back to a single religion where they believed that there was simply one God. At that time all the people were worshipping statues, so they were used to believing in things. Akhenaten had to give them something to see, to believe in, so he gave them the age of the sun as God, because this image was something they couldn't stick on their altars again. There was another reason he gave them the image of the Sunday. He told them that the breath of life, the prana field, came from the Sunday. This is true in terms of third-dimensional thinking. Though prana is really anywhere and everywhere, there are infinite amounts of it at any point. Since prana also comes from the sun, this image shows the sun's rays coming down, and on 2 of the rays are little ankhs, which the rays are holding up to the nose, to the breath, showing that eternal life is through the breath. In this same picture you also see the lotus, the national flower of Atlantis. It was the Nakals who brought the lotus to India. The Nakals are written about in Indian Sanskrit writings, and are talked about even in modern times. They came long before Buddha and were there during Buddhist times. In Egypt, the lotus flower represented Atlantis, and in this picture you see them out of the vases. Everyone knew that Atlantis was dead, but they were still paying homage to it by having the lotuses out of the vase. Figure 5 to 8 is the original wall carving. Notice that Akhenaten, the main figure, has a long, skinny neck, skinny hands, a high waist, wide thighs, and skinny legs. The usual Egyptian explanation is that he had a disease and was deformed, of course, so was Nefertiti and all their daughters. Evidently they all had the same disease. I believe something very different. Besides making the religions monotheistic again, Akhenaten also said, in this new religion we're not going to have any more lying, no more untruthfulness. And we're going to change our art so that it reflects the total truth. So during the 18th dynasty, never before nor after, there was a totally unique art form. They artists were instructed to sculpt or paint things just as their eyes saw it, like a photograph. So began an art that looked realistic instead of stylized, as it had been before. You see ducks that look like ducks, Fig 5 to 9, just like we see in modern art. This is important to remember when you are looking at art of the 18th dynasty, because that means that whatever you see is exactly what the artist saw. They were not allowed to lie. This is a statue of Akhenaten in the Cairo Museum, Fig 5 to 11. Akhenaten was 141/2 feet tall, not counting his headdress. When I stood next to this, the top of my head came up to the widest part of his hips. Nefertiti was 10 feet something. She was actually small for her race. The daughters were also very tall. This is according to Thoth. Hard evidence of this has recently come into official hands, and they don't know what to think about it. They found 2 caskets in Tel El Amarna, Akhenaten's city. This issue about truth was taken to such an extreme that they were not even allowed to wear clothes, because wearing clothes was hiding, and that was a form of lying. No one was allowed to wear clothes during the 18th dynasty except for ceremonial and other special purposes. This netter's name is Ma Fig 5 to 10. That's a feather on top other head. She became one of the most important netters in this new religion because of her name, which translates as truth or truthfulness. She was the important issue in everything. Everything was to be absolutely truthful, and there were to be no distortions, no lies, so that everything could get back into focus. This was an important part of Akhenaten's teachings. One of the caskets had the flower of life etched directly over the head of the mummy inside, and the second casket held the bones of a 7-year-old boy, but he was 8 feet tall. That casket is sitting in the basement of the Cairo Museum at this moment, at least it probably is. It's the only real proof so far of what these bodies looked like. From Thoth's teachings, this statue of Akhenaten is exactly what he looked like, just as if you took a photograph of him. This is a bust of Nefertiti Fig 5 to 12. That was found in Tel El Amarna. There is almost nothing left of that city. At one point, the city was fled brick by brick, and spread all over the world. The Egyptians did not want you to know that Akhenaten and Nefertiti had ever lived. The only son we do know is because they had buried some things in rooms deep underneath the ground that earlier people didn't find. This bust was found there. Many people think of Nefertiti as a very beautiful woman, but they don't realize that she was extremely tall and that her body was very unusual in certain ways. Figure 5 to 13 is a little-known statue of Nefertiti found in the same room as the bust. She's not wearing clothes, because they didn't believe in that at the time. She had a huge head, large ears, a long, skinny neck and a high waist. She also has a kind of bulging tummy. And if you could see the rest she has skinny legs and wide thighs. These are 2 of their daughters Fig 5 to 14. Their skulls are enormous, and they have high waists, skinny calves, and huge ears. This is another one of the daughters. Fig 5 to 15. I feel certain that it is exactly what she looked like. If you could see that head from the back, you would see its size. It was big. It's hard to see the size of these ears until you actually get right next to it. Figure 5 to 16 is another daughter, younger than the last one, little neck, huge skull extending back. This is an image of one of the daughters as a teenager. Fig 5 to 17. This is another Fig 5 to 18. You can see how big the head is relative to the body. This is a baby Fig 5 to 19. Again, the skull goes way up and around. The ears are about half the size of the head. Physiologically, these bodies are vastly different from human bodies. There are all kinds of differences, brain differences and other unusual things. For example, they have 2 hearts. The only reason we have 1 heart is because we have 1 sun. But these are Syrian beings actually. They were members of the 32 beings who were sitting around the original flame, and their bodies are from the star Sirius. The Syrian star system has 2 stars, Sirius A and Sirius B. It's a binary system, as are a vast majority of the star systems. And in those systems life forms have 2 hearts. If there's only 1 sun, life forms have 1 heart. If there are more stars than 2 in the system, there will still be 2 hearts. This is King Tut Fig 5 to 20, who took over directly after Akhenaten was disposed of. King Tut was only 18 years old when he became king. Nobody knows for certain where he came from. The slide says he was a son-in-law of Nefertiti and Akhenaten, married to their daughter. He was obviously part of this lineage, though. His skull doesn't appear as big. But he does have the big ears. According to Thoth, King Tut was allowed to take over for only 1 year. He ruled during the transition between Akhenaten and the next phase. King Tut was in telepathic communication with Nefertiti while she ran the country through him for that 1 year. She was in hiding. This is the museum at Lima, Peru. Fig. 5 to 21. I just want to note that they also have some pretty amazing skulls there. Peru is another of the places Thoth went to. They found these skulls. Fig. 5 to 22 in Peru, just like those in Egypt. These large skulls are found in 3 areas of the world, in and around Egypt, Peru, and Tibet. Nowhere else, at least that I know of. Remember, these are the primary areas where these beings went. This was one of my teachers. Fig. 5 to 23, who is now dead. His name was Kalu Rinpoche, a Tibetan Lama. I've had many teachers, but I feel especially close to this one. I really love him a lot. Notice the shape of his skull. Memory. The key to immortality. You might wonder, if Akhenaten and others were immortal, then why are they dead? I'll give you the definition of immortality from a Melchizedek point of view, which hopefully will help. Somebody else may have a different definition, but this is what we feel. Immortality has nothing to do with living in the same body forever. You're going to live forever anyway. You have always been alive and you always will be, but you might not be conscious during all that time. The definition from our point of view has to do with memory. When you become immortal, you reach the point where your memory remains intact from then on. In other words, you're conscious from then on, with no unconsciousness coming in. It means you stay in the body as long as you want to, and when you want to leave it, you leave. To have to stay in a single body forever would be a jail or a trap, because it means you couldn't leave. There might be a reason for leaving that body, and you will eventually find that you want to go beyond wherever you are. This is the definition of eternal life. Simply put, you have continuous, unbroken memory. Back now to what happened after Akhenaten was dethroned. In order to let things get back to the old ways, which they wanted to do, the country went into a transitional state. The people who became king and queen directly after him are almost comical. They let I and Tai take over the country. We have a long time lag here. Then they became king and queen. It's written right in the records. They took over for around 30 years, and then they gave it to Seti I, who became the first king of the 19th dynasty. He immediately changed everything back to the old way, erased everything and called Akhenaten the same name they called Jesus the criminal. He called him the worst king who ever lived because of his teaching that there was only one God. What really happened to Akhenaten? Most of Egypt hated Akhenaten, except for a small group. The priesthood hated him most of all because Egyptian religious beliefs were centered on the priests. They controlled the people, their way of life and the economy. They became rich and were more powerful than anybody else. Then Akhenaten came along and said, "You don't need priests. God is within you. There is only one God, and you can access God from within your own self." The priests reacted to protect themselves and their vested interests. Also, Egypt had the most powerful military in the world, and when Akhenaten became pharaoh, they were chomping at the bit, ready to go out and take over the world. Akhenaten said no. He was a complete pacifist and said, "Come back onto our soil. Do not attack anyone unless you're attacked." He made the military come back and sit by idly, and they didn't like that. So he had not only the priesthood, but the military against him. On top of that, the people themselves were into their little religions, and they loved worshipping their little gods. This wouldn't ultimately do them any good. It wouldn't get them where they needed to go according to the DNA plan of the universe, which was back home to God, to the one God. But nevertheless they were really into what they were doing. When the people were forcefully told that they could no longer do certain religious acts, this caused great animosity toward Akhenaten. It would be like our president saying, "Okay, there are no more religions in the United States, there's just the president's religion. And if the president brought all the military back onto American soil with an isolationist point of view, he wouldn't be very popular. Neither was Akhenaten. But he knew that he had to do it no matter what, even if it meant his own death. He had to do it to correct the pathway that our collective DNA had encoded into the reality. In addition, he needed to put into the Akashic records the memory of the sacred purpose that Christ consciousness held. So what happened then? According to the accepted history, the priesthood and the military got together and gave Akhenaten a poison that killed him. According to Thoth, that is not exactly what happened, because they couldn't kill him. He could drink the poison, but it wouldn't hurt him. They did something much more exotic. Thoth says that the priesthood hired 3 black Nubian sorcerers, who made a concoction similar to what is used in Haiti today to make someone look dead. It was given to Akhenaten at a public meeting called by the priesthood and the military. After Akhenaten drank the liquid, all life signs appeared to stop. As soon as the royal doctor pronounced him dead, they rushed him off to a special room where they had a sarcophagus waiting. They placed him in the sarcophagus, put on the lid with a magical seal and buried it in a hidden place. Thoth said that Akhenaten had to wait inside the sarcophagus for almost 2,000 years before a piece of the seal broke away and the magic was broken. He then returned to the halls of Amenti. This was not a problem for Akhenaten. Thoth said that to an immortal being like Akhenaten, it was more like a nap. My question is, did he really allow this to happen to him? What's important here is one fact: Akhenaten developed a mystery school. The school was called the Egyptian Mystery School of Akhenaten, the Law of One. As it turned out, he had only 171/2 years to produce results. He brought students from the left eye of Horus, the feminine side, mystery school, which I'll talk about later, graduates who were at least 45 years old, into the right eye of Horus mystery school. This right eye information had never been taught before in Egypt. He taught them for 12 years, after which he had only 5.5 years to see if he could get them to live immortality. And he did it. He got about 300 people into immortality. I believe they were all, or almost all, women. Someone once asked, why didn't Akhenaten work with the population in a different way so as to not get himself into such a dangerous situation? But can you think of a way to change a whole population in such a short time without causing strife? Could you do that in the United States right now in 1 year, bring all religions into one? I don't think there is a way except to just do it, even if it means getting killed. Besides, the only thing he really needed to do was simply live his life. It would get into the Akashic records and be a memory that we all have in our DNA. One day alone would get it encoded, then afterward they could do whatever they wanted with him. He wasn't really concerned about it. He knew that the country, the society, and the customs would all go back to the old way. But he did have these 300 immortal people who would go on beyond him and Egypt. After Akhenaten was gone, the 300 immortal Egyptians joined the Tet Brotherhood and waited from roughly 1350 BC to about 500 BC, about 850 years or so. Then they migrated to a place called Masada, Israel, and formed the Essene Brotherhood. Even today Masada is known as a capital of the Essene Brotherhood. These 300 people became the inner circle, and mostly ordinary people formed an outer circle, which became very large. Mary, the mother of Jesus, was one of the members of the inner circle of the Essene Brotherhood. She was immortal even before Jesus became immortal. Joseph came from the outer circle. This is according to Thoth. It's not written in the records. It was part of the Egyptian plan that the next step would be to bring in someone who would demonstrate exactly how to become immortal when starting as an ordinary human, put the experience into the Akashic records and make it real. Somebody had to do it. According to Thoth, Mary and Joseph came together and made it interdimensionally, which we'll talk about later, to create the body for Jesus, which would allow his consciousness to come in from a very, very high level. When Jesus first came in, he began life on earth as human as any of us. He was totally human. And through his own work he transformed himself to the immortal state through resurrection, not through ascension, and put into the Akashic records the process of exactly how to do it. This is according to Thoth, and it was planned a long, long time before it ever took place. We're now changing direction again and beginning a new system of knowledge that will continue for a while until you see this symbol again a long way down the line. This was the symbol for the Egyptian mystery school of Akhenaten, the Law of 1 Fig 5-24. It's the right eye of Horus. The right eye is controlled by the left brain, its male knowledge. Although the right eye sees directly to the right brain, this is not what the Egyptians were communicating. It is not the seeing but rather the interrupting of the seeing information that was important here. It is the left brain that makes this interruption of what is seen. It controls the right side of the body, and vice versa. In the same manner, the left eye of Horus, controlled by the right brain, is female knowledge, which was taught in the 12 primary Egyptian temples along the Nile. The 13th temple was the Great Pyramid itself. It took 12 years of initiation, spending a year, one cycle, in each of these temples learning all the feminine components of consciousness. But the male component, the right eye of Horus, was taught only once, and it was not written down anywhere. It was purely an oral tradition, though its primary components are etched on a single wall under the Great Pyramid that leads into the Hall of Records. As you go down that hall, you get almost to the bottom, and just before it makes a 90-degree turn, high up on the wall you see an image about 4 feet in diameter, which is the flower of life. Beside it you would see 47 other images, one after another, which are the images of the chromosomes of Christ consciousness, the level of consciousness we're moving into now. After these 2 volumes are published, we may publish a book of these images. These images will be given throughout this book, mixed up and in slightly different form. This is what the Great Pyramid is all about. Its primary purpose, beyond anything else, is to take someone from our level of consciousness into the next level. There are lots of other reasons why it's in existence, but ascension and resurrection are the absolute purpose. Genesis, the creation story. Egyptian and Christian versions. We're going to begin with a realization that the Christian and the Egyptian understandings of reality are almost identical. The Christian understanding is derived from the Egyptian. Here are the first 3 sentences of the Christian Bible. In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, Let there be light. And there was light. To begin with, this statement that the earth was without form until it came out of the void, out of nothing, is exactly what the Egyptians believed. It's also what many other religions believe. Both Egyptian and Christian religions believe that all that's needed to start the process of creation is nothing and spirit, and when those 2 concepts are brought together, then all things can be created. They believe that creation begins by the movement of spirit. In the second sentence it says, the earth was without form and void and that the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Then in the very next sentence, God says, Let there be light. The movement happened first, then the light happened immediately after. According to the Egyptian belief, one tiny detail was left out of the current Christian Bibles. It isn't necessarily wrong in the older Bibles, though. There are 900 versions of the Bible in the world, and in many of the older ones the first sentence says, In the beginning there were 6. It starts out in other ways too. It's been changed many times over the years. The ancient Egyptians would say that the way our modern Bibles begin creation is impossible, especially if you think about it from a physics point of view. Imagine a dark, infinite space that goes on forever and ever in all directions. There's nothing in it, just infinite space with nothing in it. Imagine yourself, not your body, but your consciousness being in the middle of that. You're just floating there with nothing. You can't really fall, because where would you fall to? You wouldn't know if you're falling down or going up or off to the side. In fact, there's no way to experience any motion at all. From a purely physics or mathematical point of view, motion itself, or kinetic energy, is absolutely impossible in a void. You can't even rotate, because motion cannot become real until there's at least one other object in the space around you. There has to be something to move relative to. If you don't have something relative to move to, how would you know you're moving? I mean, if you went up 30 feet, how would you know that? There's no change. With no change, there's no movement. So the ancient Egyptians would say that before God moved upon the face of the waters, she had to first create something to move relative to. Now, think of yourself standing in a dark room, near the door to a second room. You are ready to go into the second room, which is very, very dark. You can barely see the door leading into it. You go into the second room, close the door behind you, and it's pitch black. When you're faced with that situation, you have the ability to project a sensing beam from your third eye area, and you can also sense from your hands. You can actually sense from any chakra, but people usually do it from their third eye or their hands. You can project a beam of consciousness into that dark room for a certain distance. It might go only an inch, or maybe you can feel outward a foot or two, and you just know that nothing, or something, is in that space. Your consciousness goes out this distance and then it stops. Your knowingness quits, and you don't know what's beyond that. You probably all know what I'm talking about, though a lot of us have allowed that sense to retreat because we rely on our eyes so much. But some people, especially the ancient Egyptians, were really good at this. They could go into a dark room and feel all around and know if anything was there even though they couldn't see a thing with their eyes. There are blind people who can also demonstrate this ability. We actually have 6 of these sensing rays, not just 1, but 6. They all come from the center of our heads, the pineal gland. One ray comes out the front of our head at the third eye and another goes out the back. One goes out of the left and another out of the right side of our brain, and another goes straight up through the crown chakra and the 6th straight down through our neck, the 6 directions. These are the same directions of the XYZ axis of geometry. The Egyptians believed that this innate aspect of consciousness is what allows creation to begin. They believed that if we didn't have this ability, creation would never have happened. In order to understand this process of creation on the deepest level, Egyptian students were told to imagine and enact the process we are about to go through. The following description is how they explained and practiced it in their mystery schools. The way they learned isn't the only way it could have been done, but this is how they were trained. The dark background in this picture represents the great void, and the little eye represents the Spirit of God, Fig 5-25. So here's the Spirit of God existing in the void, out in nothing. Imagine that you're that little spirit in the middle of the void. When you're in the great void, by the way, you will realize that you and God are one, that there is no difference at all. After hanging out in the void for a long time, you probably would get bored or curious or lonely, and you would want to try something new, to have some new adventure in your life. First, create a space. So Spirit, the single eye, shoots a beam of consciousness out into the void. It shoots this beam first to the front, then to the back, then to the left, then the right, then straight up and straight down, Fig 5-26. Realize that whatever distance you project out front, you project the same distance out back, also to the left, the right, and up and down. The consciousness beam projects the same distance in all 6 directions for any one individual. Even though each one of us is different in how far we can project this beam, one of us might project an inch, another 2 feet and another 50 feet, there is equality in all 6 directions. So Spirit projects those beams outward in those 6 directions, defining space, north, south, east, west, up and down. This might be why the American Indians and Native people all around the world find the 6 directions so important. Have you ever noticed this in their ceremonies, how important it is that they define the directions? It's also important in the Kabbalah, in some of the meditations they do. Next, enclose the space. In the mystery schools, after they've projected these 6 beams in the 6 directions, the next thing they do is connect the ends of these projections. This forms a diamond, or square, around them, Fig 5-27. Of course, when it's at the angle shown in this diagram, it looks like a rectangle. But you can see that it would actually be a square. So they make a little square around their point of consciousness. Then from the square they send a beam up to the top, forming a pyramid around the base of the square Fig 5 to 28. After they create the pyramid on top, they then send a beam down to the bottom point, forming a pyramid below Fig 5 to 29. If you look at this in actual 3D space, the two back-to-back pyramids form an octahedron. Here's another rendition of the octahedron Fig 5 to 30. Remember that this is just spirit. You don't have a body in the great void. You're just spirit. So you're in the great void, and you've created this field around you. Now, once you've defined the space by mapping out the Fig 5 to 30 octahedron around spirit, octahedron with two back-to-back pyramids, you have an object. Kinetic energy or movement is now possible. Something is now possible that was not possible before. Spirit can move outside the shape and move around it. It can go in any direction for miles and miles, then come back and have a center place for everything. The other thing spirit can do is remain stationary in the middle of the shape, letting the shape move instead. The shape can rotate or wobble or move in all possible ways. So relative movements are now possible. The octahedron the students created this way had three axes front to back, left to right, and up and down. They were told to spin the shape around one of the axes, it didn't matter which, and it didn't matter which direction. They would spin it one way or the other, then they would spin the shape once around another axis, and once around the third axis. With just one spin around each of the three axes, they traced the parameters of a perfect sphere. Before the students were allowed to move their own point of consciousness, they were taught to spin this octahedral form and create a sphere around themselves. It has been agreed upon by everyone involved in sacred geometry that I know of, that a straight line is male and any curved line is female. Thus one of the most male forms is a square or a cube, and one of the most female forms is a circle or a sphere. Since the octahedron that spirit projected is made up of only straight lines, it's a male shape, and since the sphere is made of only curved lines, it's a female shape. What the Egyptians did was to create a male form and then convert it to a female form. They went from maleness to femaleness. This same story is related through the Bible, where Adam was created first, and then from Adam, or out of Adam's rib, was created the female. Of course, the image of spirit inside the sphere is also the image of the school. Sacred geometry started when spirit made its first projection into the void and created the first octahedron around itself. The void is infinite nothing in it, and these forms being created are also nothing. They're just imaginary lines created out of consciousness. This gives you an indication of what reality is nothing. The Hindus call reality Maya, which means illusion. Spirit can sit in the middle of its first creation for a long time, Fig 5 to 31, but eventually it'll make a decision to do something. To recreate this process, mystery school students were given instructions to reenact the same motions that spirit took. 2 simple instructions are all that's required to create and complete everything in the entire universe. Remember that spirit is now sitting in a sphere. The instructions are to move to that which is newly created, then project another sphere exactly like the first. That does something very special and unique. This is an absolutely foolproof system for creating reality. You cannot make a mistake no matter what you do. All you do is move to what is newly created and project another sphere the same size as the first one. In this system, since nothing exists except this bubble in the void, and the inside of the bubble is the same as the outside, the only thing that's new or different is the membrane itself, the surface of the sphere. So consciousness decides to go to the surface. It makes no difference where it goes. On the surface, it can go anywhere. It doesn't make any difference how it gets there either, whether it goes in a straight line or curves or spirals out or explores every speck of space in between. It can be really creative, it doesn't make any difference. But somehow or another it will end up somewhere on the surface of the sphere. For purposes of this example, we'll say spirit went up to the top, just to be symmetry. Cal and easier to deal with. Anyway, spirit, this little single eye, lands on the surface fig. 5 to 32. It has just made the first motion in Genesis, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And the very next thing was, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. At this point Spirit knows how to do only one thing actually, it knows how to do two things, but the end result is one. It knows, 1. How to project the little octahedron and create a sphere, and 2. How to move to what's newly created. That's it, a very simple reality. So once it arrives on the surface, it makes another octahedron, spins it through the 3 axes and forms another sphere identical in size to the first one. It's identical in size because its ability to project into the void is the same. Nothing has changed in that respect. So it creates a second sphere exactly the same size as the first. When it does that, it has done something that, in terms of sacred geometry, is very special. It has formed a vesicopiscus at the intersection of the 2 spheres fig 5 to 33. Have you ever seen 2 soap bubbles together? When 2 soap bubbles intersect, a line or a circle goes around their linkage. If you were looking at the 2 bubbles from the side, the newly formed section would look like a line, but if you were looking down at the 2 bubbles from the top, you would see the newly created forms circumference inside the larger spheres. The vesicopiscus circumference is symmetrical to, and smaller than, the circumference of the larger spheres. In other words, it would appear from the side like a straight line fig 5 to 34, center, and from the top like a circle right. Even though the vesicopiscus is usually 2-dimensional like a coin, its 3D-dimensional aspect is just as valid. If you were to take it out of the middle of the 2 spheres, it would look similar to a football, like figure 5 to 35. I cannot prove this to you now, but later in this book I'll be able to prove that this image is light. It's the geometric image through which light was created. It's also the geometric image through which your eyes were created, which receive light. Besides light, it's also the image of the patterns that are connected to your emotions and many, many other aspects of life. This is the basic geometry of the electromagnetic field. It's too simple to understand here. I have to wait until things get more complex, then I can explain it. I'll show you that the first motion of Genesis creates the pattern that is life. That's the reason why God said, "Let there be light." He couldn't say that until he had projected the second sphere and made the vesicopiscus. When spirit is in the center of its second sphere and looking down at the vesicopiscus, it's looking upon a newly formed circle, the circle of the vesicopiscus. This circle is the only thing that's new, and spirit's instructions are to go to what's newly created. It doesn't make any difference where it goes on the new circle. It cannot make a mistake, it just moves to somewhere on that circle and projects a new sphere as in figure 5 to 36. No matter where spirit lands, we can rotate the spheres to look like this drawing. So I'm going to say that it moved on the circle to point A, on the left. At that moment a huge amount of information was created. In every motion of Genesis, vast amounts of knowledge come out. The first creation produced the sphere. The first motion/day produced the vesicopiscus, which is the basis of light. The second motion/day produced, in the interpenetrating relationship between the 3 spheres, the basic geometries of the star tetrahedron fig 5 to 37, which you will soon see is one of the most important shapes for life. We're not going to get into all the information that was formed at this time, but each time a new sphere is formed, more and more information unfolds and more creative patterns become visible. After the first and second motions have taken place from anywhere on the sphere to anywhere on the circle, no matter how spirit moved, no matter where it went on the circle/sphere, it will always be perfect. It will begin to move exactly on the equator of the original sphere. There are an infinite number of equators on that sphere, but it will choose a perfect one. Fig 5 to 35. A 3D vesicopiscus, A Three-dimensional solid shape. Taken out from the two-sphere. That made it. Fig 5 to 36. Third sphere, second. Motion/day of Genesis. When sit. Tin in the center of uppermost. Circle/sphere and looking down. The horizontal line is seen as a circle. Fig 5 to 37. Small and large. Tetrahedrons in three spheres. 153. After that pattern is created, there's only one instruction left to follow forever. The only other action to be taken until the end of time is always to move to the innermost circle point, S, and project another sphere. For the sake of clarity, let's define what we mean by innermost circle point. Look at figure 5 to 36. In this case there are three innermost circle points. If your eye were to trace the outside perimeter of this pattern, it would come to three places that are the closest places to center. It is these closest places to center that we are calling the innermost circle points. In the case of the Genesis pattern that this movement of spirit is creating, there are 6 innermost circle points. So with this in mind, spirit starts moving exactly around the equator of the original or central sphere. When it has traversed the full 360 degrees and reaches the point at which it started, which will be 6 points or movements, it begins to follow its second impulse, or instruction, for the mystery. School students move to the innermost circle points, which are now located on the circumference of the original sphere where two vesica Pisces intersect. Simply put, they are the points as close as possible to the outside of the pattern. That continual movement begins to form a vortex. This vortex motion creates different types of three-dimensional forms, one after another, which are the building blocks or blueprints of the entire reality. Once spirit has created the third sphere, it now moves to the innermost circle point and projects another sphere. Fig 5 to 38. There is information here, but it is too complex to discuss it this time. This is very interesting. It is the fourth motion/day. Fig 5 to 39. It says in many Bibles in the world that on the fourth day of Genesis exactly one half of creation was completed. Starting from the first motion, exactly one half of the circle was formed. Fig 539a. We have moved exactly 180 degrees from the point of the first motion. Figure 5 to 40 is the fifth day of Genesis. More information. And then on the sixth day, Fig 5 to 41, a geometric miracle takes place. The last circle forms a complete 6-petaled flower. This is what many of the earlier Bibles meant when they said, in the beginning there were 6. Our Bible now says that creation was formed in 6 days, and this fits exactly. This is the pattern of Genesis, so we refer to it as the Genesis pattern. It's the beginning of the creation of this universe we live in. These original movements of spirit are really important. This is why I spend so much time going through this near the beginning of this course. Later on we'll get more complex, but for now this is just the beginning of how the manifestation of reality is created. We'll pull these 3D shapes off the page in a minute, one by one. If they could be made solid, you could look at them and hold them in your hands. We will begin to ground this abstract information into reality for you. Then we're going to take them further to show you how they actually create the reality we live in. If you study this on your own, you will be seeing some extremely elaborate aspects of creation come from this explanation of the reality. If you were constructing these geometries yourself, you would draw a line somewhere in the sacred geometry that spirit makes as it moves through the void, and it'll mean something amazing. Then another line will mean something else even more amazing. Life began simply, then created the complex world we live in. This is not just mathematics, and it's not just circles or geometries. This is the living map of the creation of all reality. You must understand this or you'll get lost and won't understand what this book is leading to. The reason we're doing all this is so that your left brain can understand the unity of all creation, so that polarity consciousness can be transcended.